Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Live and Unscripted. I'm Susan Smith and you are in my studio. Live and Unscripted is where I live stream quilting of an actual project, and they vary from time to time because I'm working often on client quilts and I try to pick topics or challenges or points of interest in a quilt that I think would be of interest to you. But today we're kind of going back to the basics. And doing a fairly simple, small quilt with a simple design, and it has no visible challenges. So we're going to nip through the process fairly quickly. So I have saved something fun to show you, though. So let me get one more sip of coffee in. And then I will show you something, because I do try and keep these shows very practical so that you can see different things being done that you might be doing at home in your own environment. I do want the overhead, please, because I'm going to be on both sides. Good. So you're seeing my whole machine right here. Here's the thing. Last week I was working on a quilt that had some ruler work, and I was using my red snappers. Let me grab one here. You guys have seen these before. They're fairly thick. They're about 5/8 of an inch thick. And generally when I load my quilts, I have to make room for them. Are we able to see the leveler bar, or is it hidden? There it is. You can see right here, you're just seeing it. There we go. That is my leveler bar. My quilt goes under that bar and then rolls up onto this take-up bar. When I've loaded with my snappers, it has to be able to slide underneath this bar, and that thickness is sometimes an issue. Now, when I'm loading the quilt, I've got past the issue. I've got it finally dialed in. But when I'm doing ruler quilting, as happened this week, I had my runner. Some of you saw my reel of me quilting my big long runner, and it just fit in the throat space, but only if that red snapper was parked under this bar, and I couldn't quilt that way. So all that to say, what I did was I zipped off my leader that had my snapper core in it, and I pinned my quilt to this leader to give me that more room so that I could get my whole thing in the throat space. So this is the beauty of zipper leaders. Some of you may have them, some of you might not. But I'll show you how this works. Starting at this end. This is Stella, by the way. Those of you who haven't met her yet, we'll talk more about her later. And literally the hem of this leader is zipping off. There's a heavy-duty zipper that attaches it. And I have a second set of leaders. So this one is just the plain canvas hem, and therefore I was able to pin my quilt backing to that. We'll fold that up and put it away later. There it goes. I think I'll come around to the other side, though, for this part. Make it easier on myself. Because this is my usual leader. Are we seeing this okay? Yeah, we are. This is my usual leader, and it's got the red slim rod inside it that my snapper snaps to. And so this is what I typically keep zipped on my machine, and I have to turn it because my zipper head is at the other end. But this is how simple it is to change it. So in my case, it was just a matter of space and room. But you can also utilize this if, for example, you've got a highly custom quilt loaded and you want to stop and do another project. You can literally unzip this while a quilt is attached to the leader, fold it and put it away, and load another leader and another quilt. Finish it up, and then zip the first quilt back on. I don't do that super often because it does require a little fiddliness to get it flat and smooth, but it is quite doable. It is a solution when you're in a time crunch. So just like that, I've zipped my leader back on, and now I'm back to my ordinary prep, which is I swing my leader under this dead bar or leveler bar and over my roller. And then I'm ready to load today's project. Never let anyone tell you that quilting is not a workout. It's warm in this room and I'm just, toasty. Okay, today's quilt. It is one that belongs to my good friend Pris. I bet you've heard me talk about her before, those of you who have been here before. She makes quite a lot of quilts for her local NICU, baby quilts, and they're always sweet. She often pieces the backing in fun ways. I don't think today's is pieced. But another thing she always does for me is marks the top, which I so appreciate. As you can see, today's design is a bit directional. There's not really a top and bottom, but there's definitely an up and down or sideways. And so she just routinely puts top on the top of her backing and her quilts, which is very helpful. It seems like that would be really obvious when you're loading a quilt, but in fact, if you're doing several quilts in a day and just flipping from one to the next, it is just all too easy to miss. So I appreciate that Pris marks that. And I personally always put that on the left. So when I've got a quilt that's turned, I always turn toward the left. Again, just makes fewer errors. Okay. Now here's something else you'll get to see today. Notice how Pris has got a seam here joining two pieces of backing, and notice how there's a jog there. I do not have to take the time to trim that up. What I do need to have is a straight edge on this front rail. That is critical to loading my quilt straight, but that is easier to achieve than trying to square up a whole backing, let me tell you. So I'm going to use this lovely straight edge and clip it on the front of the quilt, closest to me, all the way across. That is not laying quite straight. Let's try that beginning inch again. And I'm just using my leader, the zipper lines, the hem lines on my leader to help me keep it straight. So in other words, evenly spaced from the edge. Equal amount always under the clamp as well. So I can make those adjustments if I need to make sure that edge is beautifully straight. Toot toot, Stella. We are in inland Washington on the eastern side. And I tell you what, the fall color right now is gorgeous. Our whole street in front of our house is lined with maples, and they are spectacular. And when I walk up the stairs and into my kitchen, I just kind of, the window appears and those bright red leaves, and often the sun is shining through them during the day. Oh my goodness. It's my happy moment in many days right now. I think Dave just snapped a picture for you. Okay, so we've got our front straight edge loaded, and now I'm going to toss the rest of the quilt over the back rail, and this is key. I want to make sure that it's going straight over. Because I did not square this up, I'm going to rely on my rolling process to roll it on straight. I've got to set it up for straightness, right? So wherever I see that there might be a diagonal kind of crease pulling, like there is a bit here, can you see that? I know that needs a little tweak, a little adjustment to be rolling on straight. Now that that's done, we will just start rolling. Oh, look, you can see there you go. Dave took a picture. I mean, you're seeing a little piece of them there, but there must be 50 trees, something like that on our lane. It is just beautiful. Just beautiful. Okay, rolling our quilt. And I'm just watching on the back side to when the edge of the quilt, which is now a selvage edge, so I know it's straight, when it's coming close to the end of my leader. And then I walk around to the back of the quilt. And I double check visually. This is a small quilt, so it's quite easy to see. You know, are there any pulls? Are there any weird sags? Nope, there's not. It's loaded really nice and straight. And how quick is that? And I did not center the backing. I don't need to center the quilt itself, and I did not need to trim or square up the backing. That is a time saver. Okay, we are loaded. Beautiful, just like that. And now for the batting, which I will reach and grab. Today, Pris gets to have a lovely soft bamboo batting. I'll tell you a little secret. For those of you who perhaps do quite a lot of quilting and buy batting by the rolls, I always opt for the 120-inch wide roll, which is 10 feet. because frequently I can get a lap quilt and a baby quilt or another lap quilt beside it. So I can get 2 quilt lengths out of that 120-inch width. So this is, in fact, left over from another quilt. And I'm just going to give it a quick trim. You notice I put the long way this way. I've already planned, remember, that my quilt top, the top went toward my left, the quilt's going to go toward my left. So the orientation of the quilt has turned. Did the same thing with my batting. But I do not like my batting to extend beyond the backing at all because it gets in the way of the wheels and rollers. So I'm just going to fold this up, grab my scissors, and give that a quick rough trim. Pardon me while I go get the scissors. In an ideal world, I'd measure this all before I came on air, but I didn't. So just a quick trim so that that batting is not hanging over the edge at all. Toss that to the side. And now we'll smooth the batting down. This last weekend, I was vending at our local quilt show, so I had a booth there. And I met a lot of people and got to tell them about the Live and Unscripted show. So I'm hopeful that there are some new folks here today. So I'm going to explain some of these steps that maybe I've fallen into the habit of just doing quickly because a lot of you are regular viewers and perhaps already know what they are. But for today's purposes, let's talk a little bit about what floating a quilt means. Notice, Chris has labeled the top for me. I'm going to the left with it. Kind of think this little quilt is actually square. Kind of think, which end shall I go at, Dave? Because I can be efficient with Pris's backing fabric. I will come toward this end, and that can just get trimmed off later. Okay, here's the little quilt. I'm going to take that top pin off. I saved those pins for Pris. What floating a quilt means is that this front edge of the quilt, I do not roll on to my machine rollers. This is strictly a matter of preference, but let me explain to you my whys and see if you might want to give this a try too. It is difficult, in my opinion, to roll this onto a roller and get it perfectly straight and flat. Lots of quilters do it, so it absolutely can be done. I think that the more oddities your quilt has, like a wavy border or an area that, an hourglass shape or something like that, it becomes more difficult, incrementally more difficult to roll it on a roller. I prefer to literally address those challenges with each pass. So the way I'm going to do it is I will base this top edge of the quilt. You'll see me doing that in a moment. I will put magnets on the front so that my whole area that I'm working on is stable and can't shift. Then I'll go ahead and quilt all of that. Then I'll roll my quilt and advance it. I will assess, are my seam lines running straight? Does anything need to be tugged out to the edges? Like, how is it laying for straightness and flatness? And then I will base the sides again, stabilize the front again, and work through my quilt in increments. And no matter how big the quilt is, I do it that way. I certainly prefer it. And a note on challenges, an hourglass quilt being one of them. If you have smaller areas or one end is smaller, be aware that you can't really pull the smaller part out to be bigger. It is always going to pull back in when you release. So if you have that issue, find that out before you load it, is what I'm saying, and try to then nudge in the fuller bits to match the skinnier bits. Pris is a great piecer, so hers is lovely and flat. We don't really have any of those issues today. Okay, on to quilting. Meet Stella. Stella is my long arm. She's a Bernina Q24. And let's see. I've already got thread loaded, but I think I'm going to change the foot. Do you want the close-up camera for a second? This is actually my ruler foot. The last thing I was doing was that little runner that I was quilting for my banner at my vendor booth, and I was using rulers, and so I've got this thick foot on it. But in fact, I don't need that. So today I'm going to put the darning foot back on, which has a little bit better visibility, which you'll see in just a moment. Oh boy, where has Susan put the darning foot? I put everything away so carefully. Hang on a second. It's on my sewing machine. You can't see me running and getting it. Here's the cool thing about Berninas, which I might as well tell you right now. My little feet that are spring-loaded are interchangeable between my sewing machine and my long arm. So I was quilting on my sewing machine the other day, and that's why I had it over there. Okay, this is the little darning foot. See how tiny? There are other feet that are even U-shaped, and you can see even better, but this one works well for me. So this is a good standard foot. I am using Isacord 100% poly thread in a really, really, really pale gray. What looks probably to you like white in the quilt is actually, it's a grunge fabric, so it's got tones of tans and grays in it. So I didn't want white thread, or even eggshell thread, honestly. All right, I've got my basting stitch on at 1/4 inch, and I'm just going to run up the side of the quilt here. I'm doing this by guess and by gosh. If you have a Q-matic system where you can engage the belts, or if you have channel locks on your brand of machine, you certainly could do that to get 100% straight line. I often do this by feel. I have basted so many quilts that I feel like I have a pretty good grasp of getting that basting line straight. This seam feels bulky here. What's the deal? There we go. And I've gone across, you can see me in the big camera, and if there was any fullness, I would be either, first step would be I would kind of be easing it and distributing it with my hands. If there was quite a lot of fullness, I'd be dropping in some pins so this can't sort of push out in front of me when I'm basting. But actually this one's in pretty good shape. I'm going to pull just a little on the fabric that's being stitched, because you can see there's a bit of ripples in this border, and this will just ease in that a tiny, tiny bit, and that's all I need is that tiny bit. It seems to me no matter how perfect the piecing is, when you start putting fluffy layers of batting between layers of fabric, you always have to be adjusting a little bit, or at least be aware so that the top layer of fabric does not push ahead of where you're stitching. Even with 100% perfect piecing, that can still happen. A quilt can become unsquare. So I've gone up the left side, across the top, and down the right. So again, you may have seen other machine quilters who start in the middle and go toward the left, and then start again in the middle and go toward the right. Again, a matter of preference. I feel like I've done enough quilts, and I arrange my quilt well enough, and I don't let it shift, that I can achieve a square quilt doing it in one fell swoop. But if you're more comfortable starting from the middle and working toward the edge in order to be sure that it's symmetrical, by all means do that. And then lastly, I have side clamps. They are also by the Red Snapper people. They're called E-edge clamps, and there's a tiny little channel in there in which my backing fabric will slide. And it's a bit of a frayed edge, so I'm just having to run it back and forth. There we go. There's a little rubber gripper inside there, and that hangs on to my whole edge. Now, there are various ways that you can clamp the edge of a quilt to put a little tension on it toward the left. My machine, in fact, comes with, I can show you, 2 of these clamps on elasticy strings, but I love the E-edge clamps because they grip this whole throat space, right, and give even tension on the whole thing, as opposed to a clamp here and a clamp there. So there are other side clamps that have a similar feature. So it's not that this is the only brand, but I do like this one. It's very slim, and it grips the whole throat space quite nicely. They come in different widths. I have the longest ones. So if you had a smaller throat space, you would get a shorter clamp. And again, we're not making a drum here. We're just putting enough tension on the side so that our quilt can't sag and form ripples. So it's just a light tension. And then lastly is my magnetic bars on that front rail. So again, for those few of you who may be new here today, this is part of my loading system as a whole. Because I don't roll my top of my quilt onto a roller, I don't use this top roller. There's nothing affixed to it. It is literally just the quilt slides over it. And so I've got my backing, my batting, and my quilt layers, and I never have more layers than that, which means my magnets will always stick. People will write me a lot of times and say, Well, but my backing is rolled up on that roller and there's multiple layers of fabric and my magnets fall off and beat up my toes. That's part of the system. So you have to choose what works for you. But if you can't use magnets, you can also use some type of C-clamps, or worst case scenario, you could literally run a row of pins or a line of basting stitch across the front. But in some way, you need to stabilize that front edge so that your working space cannot shift in any way. All right, lecture over. I'm going to put my stitching back on regular. I'm going to grab my coffee cup and let's see if there are any comments or questions, yeah? This is the fun of Live and Unscripted. We get to chat with each other. And today I remembered to keep my Ember mug for the show. So I have hot coffee. Okay, I'm supposed to remind you, if you have an actual question, would you put QQ in front of it so that Mr. Producer can search for them and find them? Some days we have lots of comments and it's hard to find them. Juliana, thanks for showing the zipper. I don't have one and I tried loading your way, but my leader gets pulled over the bars. Ah, I bet the weight of the zipper is key to your loading method. It's possible, Juliana. I follow what you're saying. Your quilt fabric is pulling your leader back, that resistance. Could be, and my leaders are also fairly heavy canvas, and I know sometimes leaders are more like a cottony feeling fabric. So you're right, that all factors into the process. I'm sorry, I'm glowing. I am just toasty. Betsy, if you can't use the magnets, how would you stabilize? Well, I gave you a couple of options with pins or a row of basting. Other brands, some of them will have PVC type C-clamps that fit over. That's an option too. Any of those ways will work. Any more? Oh, that's lovely hot coffee. David McLaughlin, howdy from Medical Lake. We met last weekend. I forgot to ask you then, the red snapper bar inside your leader, does yours pop apart? Mine come apart occasionally. I think I have an older version, David. Mine actually screw together. I think there's 3 sections across my whole leader, and before I fed them in there, I literally screwed one into the next one. You might check at a hardware store and see if you could find screws that would fit in yours. You know, if it's a permanent setup, that might be an option.
Just take a screw and cut the head off and screw it in.
Mr. Producer is saying take a screw, cut the head off, and screw it in. He is a get her done kind of guy. Kathy, can you restate the name of the side clamps and where I can get them? Absolutely. They're made by the Red Snapper people. Dave will put a link in for you. I have it in my Amazon store, Dave. Also, they're specifically called E-Edge clamps. So the lady who designed the Red Snappers, her quilt shop is called Quilts on the Corner. So that'd be the first place I would look to give her the business and everything like that. But they are available on Amazon. So if she's out of your size or out of stock, which does happen, I do have a link in the notes below every one of my episodes. I have stuff I use, and there's a link to my Amazon store. And I've got a whole list of, you know, the marking things and the E-Edge clamps and the Red Snappers and all the things that I like to use are linked in there. So that's an option. But again, do go to the local shop, quiltsonthecorner.com. Renee is the inventor of the Red Snappers.
That's it.
Okay, that's it for comments. All right, people, let's get quilting. I am going to do a simple design today because why not? We haven't done a simple one in a while. And I'm totally off camera, hon. I'm weird, but I like starting in the top right-hand corner. I don't know why, but there's no reason that you have to. You can also start in the top left-hand corner, whatever works for you. And today we are just quilting a simple loopy, kind of a double loopy sort of design. So if any of you is driving a Bernina, I'm using BSR 1, which means I have a stitch regulator and I've got a coasting feature. Watch this. When I start my machine like so, maybe. No, what's happening? There we go. What is happening? Okay, now I've got it. When I start my machine, see how it coasts? When I move, the stitch regulator kicks in, but when I hold still, it coasts. That is the BSR 1. It's got that little coasting feature in there. Okay, here we go. This is the very first design I teach in my free motion quilting masterclass. It is my opinion that this is a hill I might die on. It is my opinion that loops are far easier to learn as a beginner quilter than meander. I don't know why meander has stuck in our minds from the time free motion quilting first began as the place to start. I think a meander is actually quite difficult because you're always changing directions. And that's hard to learn, frankly, when you're thinking about so many other things, like moving your machine or moving your fabric. So to me, loops are the way to start when you're just beginning, because you're always moving in the same direction. You're just literally going around and around in circles, and only very occasionally do I change when I want to just change the orientation of my loop. But you never have to. Also, I feel like the best way to learn how to quilt better, to gain better control of your machine and better precision, is to practice simple shapes, foundational shapes, and make them as good as you can. So instead of just whacking out this design as fast as I can today, I'm going slowly enough that I can be thoughtful about actually getting round circles. And this is fantastic practice for bubbly designs or anything that's got circles in it. You know, pebbles and bubbles tend to be tiny, but sometimes you just want to quilt something with swirls even that's got that round circular shape. This is fabulous practice for that. But what makes it grow your skill is when you quilt it with care, even when you're quilting such a simple design as this. Pay some attention to getting round circles. This can also be good practice for echoing. You see that when I need to travel, or when I have a small space, I do a single loop. Mostly I do doubles, and when I need to travel a distance, I'll just keep going around my bubble again. So that can be really good practice too for your sort of spatial awareness. Here, we're going to go around a third time right there. And it's just good practice for my eye to make a nice, evenly spaced circle around that inner one. All kinds of ways that you can practice while doing this design. If you're watching in the larger camera, the larger view, not the close-up, you will notice too, I'm going to pause to kind of show you this. You will notice that I'm quilting in a kind of diagonal way. I started in the corner and now I'm working back and forth like this, as opposed to quilting in rows from left to right, or even in rows up and down. I don't want my circles to sit in rows and columns. And one way to make sure that doesn't happen is to quilt in this diagonal way. And it also keeps me from ever having an area way up here at the top that that got left undone. And all of a sudden I'm quilting way over here and I have a hard time getting back to that. So it's a really good way to organize your movement around the quilt. So while I quilt this, I have a couple of show stories for you. The first day, I volunteered for the setup help, so that usually means hanging all the quilts on the day before the show, and we have about 500 quilts hanging at our show, so that is a big, big job. So we're all standing first thing in the morning, getting our kind of marching orders, and we had a new hanging system this year, so hangers instead of pins, so there was lots to learn, and we had to pay attention. Anyway, there were two ladies in charge of this, and the one lady is doing the talking and doing the demo. And then she says, now, if you have any questions, ask Heidi. And someone pipes up and says, who's Heidi? And she said, look for the lady with the white hair. And of course, we all broke out laughing because approximately 40% of the people standing there were white-haired. If you've ever volunteered at a quilt show, you'll just know that's true. This was my first time ever having my own booth. Actually, I've worked in booths lots at quilt shows, but I've never had my own. So that was a new experience for me. And I was beside two really interesting ladies. One was Good Vibes Quilting. You can look up Chrissy online if you want to. She had some fabulous fabric, some Ruby Star fabric. Of course, I came home with some. And she was just fun. So we were sort of back to back and could literally talk to each other, you know, through the curtains. So we did. And then kitty corner to us was a lady who has a large booth, and the whole thing is vintage quilts, quilt tops, and yardage. And I'm not talking a little bit of yardage. I'm talking shelf upon shelf upon shelf of, I think it's 36-inch wide, the vintage cottons. Absolutely stunning. I can't send you to her store online because she does not have an online presence. She does have an email address, but she does not shop online. She does not do social media. So all I'm going to say is you have to come to the Spokane Quilt Show. This was her second year, and I think she's going to try and come back every year. And I love it. It's so unique. Everything that she has is so unique. It was interesting vending because what I was selling is not product. I only have a couple of patterns on Etsy, and mostly what I was vending or presenting is my online courses and this YouTube channel. And so to try to convey to people through what I have hanging on the walls and then through what I have showing on screens and through our conversation, what it is that I'm about was kind of a learning process throughout the weekend. Okay, we are done one pass. I'm just going to park with needle down. Take my side clamps off. My magnets. Note to self, set the magnets away from where you walk. Do not kick them with your big toe. Like I said, this is a little quilt. Here's the end of it already, right? Okay, here's my process when I advance the quilt now. I give a tug to both the quilt top and the batting to make sure there's no batting creeping up in the middle. Especially when you have bigger quilts, that will often happen. The sides will get just a tiny bit stretched, and it does not take much. And they'll start stretching, and it will start creeping in toward the center. So I just make it a practice of habit. I always just walk along the whole front, tug, 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 till everything is smooth. And often I will smooth it firmly with my hand as well. Visually, I check that my sides are even, and you guys can't see it, but I have a long armor's tape measure stuck on my dead bar, so I can actually see my measurement, 35.5, 8.5. I can literally, as I advance the quilt, be checking that it is maintaining that measurement on the way down, and I'm not migrating to one side or the other. Once I'm confident about that, I'm going to look at one last thing. My seam lines need to be parallel with my bar. This is where if your quilt had challenges and maybe one side was a little shorter or a little longer, right? You might be seeing, oh, hey, those seam lines are not running straight. What do I need to adjust? And adjusting usually means zhuzhing up the bit that's longer to match the bit that's shorter. But in Pris's case, she's got a lovely flat quilt. We're golden. And so now I'll put it back on basting. And run down this side. Again, just taking steps to make sure the fabric does not push out in front of my hopper foot. No matter how flat and square the quilt is, it will still tend to do that, unless you take steps against it. I'm basting it with 1/4-inch stitches because I have that feature readily available on my machine, but if you don't have a basting stitch, you can just use your regular quilting stitch to sew that. Or you can hop one stitch at a time. I've done that before too when I want to a large basting stitch. My last machine didn't do 1-inch stitches, and so I would just literally take a stitch like this, stitch, 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 when I wanted big basting. So all kinds of ways you can do that. But this line of stitching all falls within the binding seam allowance. I'm well within 1/4 of an inch, so no one's ever going to see it. So it doesn't have to be pretty, and it doesn't matter what you choose for size of stitch length. Just needs to secure those outer edges. Do we have any questions or comments before I dive into quilting again? Okay, let me just get my other side clamp on before I forget it. I'm apt to get talking to you guys, and bless your hearts, you are often on the other end saying, don't forget to put your clamps on. Don't forget to oil your bobbin. And I appreciate all of that. Okay. Get my coffee in hand, Stella out of the way. Carrie, my friend tried to show me meandering, but I would get loops. I still don't meandering. Meandering's tough. I completely agree. That is not the easiest design in the world to learn. So start with loops. Single loops, double loops. Add little fun things to your loops, all before you try meandering, in my opinion. B, I've been using stencils and rulers as a beginner. It's easier for me to follow a line. Fair enough. If that gives you help and security and support, absolutely. It's like training wheels, and it's valuable and useful. But don't forget to branch out at some point. Christine, what isocord color are you using? I think it is 0184. Whoops. Yes, 0184. Which is just a light silvery. I even sometimes use it on white fabrics. It's like a shadow. Sue, how high do you have your long arm frame? I'm finding even if I long arm in short spurts, my back starts to hurt. I'm thinking my long arm may be too low. Great question. Do you want to put the big camera on for a sec, Dave? My long arm is at my center rib cage. It is distinctly above my waist by about 3 inches, I would say. And yes, that is higher than most dealers, for example, would recommend. They'll often say, hold your arm at a 90-degree angle, and that's where you should be grabbing the handlebars. I prefer it higher. But a couple things to think about. If you're doing a lot of custom quilting or detailed or ruler work, sometimes you prefer it lower because it's easier to get pressure on the ruler and less fatiguing on your arm. But knowing my style, which is this edge-to-edge type of quilting, I much prefer it higher, less fatiguing, and I have a tendency to hunch into my work anyway, so that helps me to stay more upright. So I raised my machine. Almost all machines are, even if you don't have hydraulics, and I don't either, they are adjustable, but it's usually a 2-person job. There will be some apparatus on the frame that you can lift in increments, and I strongly suggest trying it higher and quilt a bit with it and see how it feels. Yep, agreed. How do you move across the quilt without messing up your stitches? Because as I try to shuffle one way or the other, it always messes up whatever I'm quilting. Okay, I have a funny video that I share with my students, which was a casual one of me standing here one day showing how I manage my feet, but I'll try and give it to you in a capsule format. I was chatting with a student who had been a dancer in her youth, Irish dance kind of thing. And there's a term for it, which I now can't remember, but essentially whatever foot your weight is on is anchored, and it's very hard to move that without jerking. So what I literally do that you can't see, it's just become habitual to me, is I put my front foot forward, so to speak, and I pull the back one along, but my weight never shifts to that front foot. It always remains on the back foot. So I reach and take a step, reach and take a step, and that's more how I move, because you're absolutely right. If you shift that weight onto your leading leg, it's going to be very hard to pick up that leg without rocking your body. So give that a try. Anchor step or standing step, the expert tells me.
Well, AI tells us.
Oh, AI is telling him this. It's useful. B, your long arm sounds a lot better than mine. I mean, they all sound a bit different, Bee, and I'm always telling people who are shopping for a long arm to trot round a quilt show and try them all and listen to them. But the Bernina does indeed purr. It does. It drives like a Cadillac. It's one of the things I love about it. Catherine, do you recall the name of the vintage quilting booth that was next to you? I don't. You know what? What's the best way to do this, Dave? Because I don't see these comments. If you do a comment after the show, I'll come back and read the comments and answer. I have her business card up in my office, and I can provide her email address. I'd be happy to do that.
And I will look as well, see if I can find it online.
Okay. Yeah, I can't remember the name of it. Okay, there was something else I was going to say. It's gone. We'll just... Oh, there's one more.
Sorry.
We've lost it. There we go. I have a bump in my table. I've tried leveling it and the level seems correct. Any advice of how to correct the bump? Do your bars have a splice in them? Some brands have like 2 wooden bars that have a splice and that can be iffy. I think probably the first thing I would do is a deep clean. You know, in the rails and the wheels, I would get pieces of batting fluffy in there to catch lint, and I would also go in with alcohol swabs and literally clean the wheels. So I will just put an alcohol swab against it and run my wheel, and that gets the whole thing, right? Any buildup of grease which catches a smidge of lint, it only takes a smidge, and it will give you that thumpity bump. So leveling is one thing, being sure that your rails are perfectly straight and level and don't have a bump in them. And then checking for any kind of residue wherever any of the movements are on your X or your Y axis is where I'd go with that. Okay, is that it?
Yeah.
Let's quilt for a while, then we'll talk again. I put my side clamps on, just double checking. So notice that I'm starting on the other side of the quilt now. This is why I said it doesn't matter which side you start on initially, because when I'm doing an edge-to-edge design, I always alternate my paths. It's another way that I keep my design looking organic and random, right? If I was quilting flowers and I went right to left, right to left, right to left, it would look like a stiff wind was blowing across my quilt. So I always, if I've done one pass from right to left, next pass is left to right. And I just alternate my way down the quilt that way. Again, not a have to. It's just another way to keep your stitching organic looking and not like they're soldiers standing in rows and columns. So since we are doing a beginner design, it's actually a great day to talk about my free motion quilting masterclass. This is something that I created because I had so many people asking me, how do you do those designs? Or I don't have ideas, or how do you move around a quilt top? And so I have pre-recorded this entire class. And like I said, this is in the first module. These loops are part of that module. It's only one of the designs. To walk you through building a repertoire of free motion quilting designs. So I highly recommend it. And at this time, registration is open. Those of you who have been longtime followers know that at times I've only opened registration periodically. But for right now, I have got it wide open, and I am rolling out very shortly studio hours once a month for every student who has ever enrolled in that class, so that you have opportunities to talk to me and ask questions if you wish to. I've got to get up in that little corner. There we go. Anyway, this masterclass has about 25 different free motion quilting designs. So this is the first one, and after I teach you a couple loops and loopy type of variations, then I kind of go into my learning process. And where this evolved from is when I was learning quilting. And at some point, I had this idea for a quilt that I wanted to do some elaborate quilting on, and I could see it in my head, and I knew I did not have the detailed control or precision on my machine to carry out the vision that was in my head. And so I actually did some research on how we learn things to see if I could really advance my skill in the space of, say, 6 months, as opposed to just doing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds more pliant quilts. And turns out, yes, indeed, I can. So in Module 2, I go into, it's hard to call it my signature method because lots of teachers have taught this way before, but I think I'm the first person really applying it to quilting. But it all has to do with what I was alluding to earlier. When you are quilting shapes, be very intentional about it and break down your quilting into smaller increments and focus on one learning thing at a time. It's maybe easiest if I tell you an analogy, and I'm giving away part of my course, but here goes. But this is how I teach. Think of golfing. Our son recently took golfing lessons, and so this is in the forefront of my mind. He goes out and his instructor doesn't just say, okay, hit balls on the driving range. No, his instructor will say, okay, today we're working on your grip of your clubs. Or another day it might be we're working on your stance, how you hold your shoulders and your hips. Or another day it might be the follow through of your swing. Do you see where I'm going? This same process can apply to quilting. If you focus on learning the shapes, and then you focus on smoothness of movements, and then perhaps you focus on how you move or hold your body. If you work on those things one at a time and with intention, well, I'll tell you my result. I did the quilt that was in my head, and I won a major ribbon with it, and I was so thrilled because to me that's proof of concept. I can rapidly increase my pace of learning by being intentional about it. It's kind of cool. All that to say, a lot of talking. There is a link for my free motion quilting masterclass below all these episodes if you're interested in that. And if you are still at your earlier stages and are not even sure like how to load a quilt or how to choose batting or needles, I also have a smaller one called Machine Quilting for Beginners, which is not about quilting designs. It's about all those brass tacks of quilting. And in both cases, I demonstrate my techniques at my sit-down, my domestic sewing machine, and my long arm. So you do not have to be a long arm quilter to learn the designs that I teach. I do every single one of them at the domestic machine. In many cases, they're scaled down a little bit smaller, because it's hard to do big movements. It's hard to do 4 or 5 inch circles round at a sit-down machine. You might have to make them 2.5 or 3. But I do quilt out every one of the designs for you at the domestic machine too. If you are loving this, I would so appreciate if you would give it a thumbs up and or subscribe. If you click the little bell, YouTube will kindly notify you whenever I am coming live again. And also if you sign up for my newsletter, I try to give advance notification of what the project that I'm working on will be. So all my newsletter people got an email yesterday with a picture of this quilt and some thoughts about what I would be talking about. And a story. I do love telling stories. Yesterday's email had a good one. Can you see how I've filled in the part that was furthest away from me first? That was part of my diagonal movement. And now I'm just left finishing up this corner that is closest to me. Just like that. I'm actually going to take my needle out this time because I'm going to baste from left to right. And I'll tell you why, because this is a reality show. Stella right now is giving me a little bit of grief, and she does not like stitching from right to left. And that is not typically true. Typically, I do not have to be careful of that. I can stitch right to left or left to right at will. But right now, I know already I cannot baste the bottom of this quilt from the right side to the left. So Stella, bless her heart, is going to the doctor this coming week to see if we can get that resolved. So again, my usual sort of checklist. I'm checking the width of my quilt at the back here. This is a small quilt, so I'm not seeing a lot of pullage, but if you have a queen-sized quilt, I will often literally grab on this rail, and I'll usually stand at the other side and do it because it's easier, but I'll grab this rail and squeeze and push the finished quilt out, and I can often scooch it over as much as ½ an inch. And that's just helpful to keep things square and straight. This end is good. We're still at 8½. Tug on all my bits. Did I mention that I'm using bamboo batting today? This is by Winline, and it's their heavier one. They're 6 ounce. Oh my goodness, it is just lovely. Lovely, lovely. Type in any questions or tips if you have them, or comments. This is not a quilt with many challenges. Lots of times, though, you guys are so forthcoming with your experience too, and I so appreciate that. We've done some good quilting together over the years. Actually, that reminds me, I have a tiny ask. I kind of hesitate to do this because I know it's public, but I'm going to do it, and I'm just going to do it very gently. I noticed this week on Facebook that AccuQuilt, the brand, most of you will have heard of it, it's a cutting system. They began a live show on their Facebook page this week. And guess what it's called? Live Unscripted. So my little gentle ask is, I'm not in that group, so I can't go in and talk to them. I've reached out to the company, but of course just gotten, their menu system. My gentle ask, if any of you are in that group, is would they consider changing that name because it is so like mine. And we're talking to quilters also. If they were in a different field, wouldn't matter so much to me. But that's going to be crazy confusing to quilters to have a live and unscripted and to have a live : scripted. Or live unscripted. Live : unscripted is what they're calling it. And it's just so very close. And so I'd just like to cordially ask them if they would consider changing that name to be different. All right, now we have come, can you guys see it? If I move Stella, you might be able to. We've come to this portion of the backing that had that jog in the seam allowance. Right, it's right here. Can you see that? So I don't think my E-edge clamp is going to work very well here. Let's give it one try to see if it puts even tension on. It might. Otherwise, for this last portion of the quilt, I would just use my elastic straps, right? Whatever works, whatever fits. I don't have to quilt very close to this clamp, so this hangingness is not bothering me. But you may have noticed that I have yardsticks on my machine, and this is what I use them for. When I need to hoist that up so that I can move my long arm freely without banging into these clamps, that's how I do it. So any long straight thing will work. I happen to have a couple vintage yardsticks, but curtain rod, anything would do that well. We're going to start quilting on the right, because last time we started quilting on the left. We're going to get a sip of coffee. Do we have any questions, hon? Oh, I joggled the camera. I'm so sorry. I don't think I joggled it much. Elixir. Magic. Mary Jo, try the Bernina 130 Pro needles for thread shredding when stitching to the left. I should probably try that, Mary. That's a good point. However, I've tried several different needles on my machines, and I've kind of settled on, at the moment, I'm using the 9014 size top stitch needle because it has the longer eye and is usually good for all kinds of fabrics, all kinds of threads. And Berninas are known for not being fussy, right? They're usually quite competent at using different needles and even using multiple kinds of threads and doing it happily. So I feel like something needs adjusting in my machine. It shouldn't be finicky like that. It shouldn't be. So I'm going to try and get it fixed. Janice, any chance you have an HQ studio? Oh, she's talking to someone else, Dave. Good. I'm happy for this, that you guys have a conversation between you in the chat. Go for it. That's what this is all about. Janice, I have to work on nesting my loops better. Your coverage is so even. I tend to have open areas between. Couple ways that I fix that, Janice. Watch when I'm quilting the next one. Notice that my inner loop, I immediately move away from it and echo it. So in other words, I don't get a little loop and then the big one intersecting at the same place. Does that make sense? The whole second loop and third loop are larger. So that's one way that will help it spread its wings a little bit. And another is pop in a single loop wherever you need to fill in some of those space areas. That will be fine. I've done that a lot too. Laura, thanks for all you do and teach. I'm on the last stretch of a total hip replacement and I'm going crazy waiting to get back to my long arm. At least I can watch someone else quilt. Well, I am happy to oblige and I'm so glad you're here and I hope your recovery is going well. Liz, does the bamboo batting shrink much? It does not, Liz. It's advertised at 2 to 3%, which is what the 80-20 is as well. The difference in it is, well, it feels different. It feels softer than 80-20, and it's a little bit more stretchy. I have to be a little more conscious of managing it so that it doesn't pull and get misshapen. But it's my choice now for my quilts. I love the bamboo, the heavyweight bamboo. Okay, here's a sales pitch. Debbie, if you're at all on the fence of taking the Masterclass, let me tell you it's well worth it. Debbie, you're such a sweetheart. I was brand new to long arm quilting and it gave me confidence and designs. I get better with each quilt. And I can tell you that is true. Debbie dove in with both feet and she has quilted so many quilts in the last, year and a half maybe since you enrolled and gotten better and better and better and better. So it's like taking wing. Yeah, so good. Thanks, Debbie. Okay, you guys, let's keep quilting. One more pass. We're starting from the right. Make sure I can reach all the way to the top. Yes? So here was the discussion going on behind the scenes. Do you want to put me on again? Okay. Here was the discussion going on behind the scenes. Dave was asking me, did I want him to actually post the link to that AccuQuilt live unscripted event that they were having so you could know and see it? And so we chose to. Just please know my heart in this. I'm not trying to be an aggressive quilter, but I also am trying to maintain clarity and confusion. It's not good for them or good for me for us to have two live shows that are so closely named. And so I want some quilters to cordially ask them, please consider renaming that. And they're welcome to reach out to me. I called and left all my contact information. I don't have too much hope that they'll actually get back to me, but who knows? BSR1. Here's what I mean by going out from the intersection point of a loop. I'm going to make a bigger circle, and I do not want my circle to end up back at this point, right? Watch when I come back around. You'll be able to see it on the blue. I'm going to echo it, and I'm going to stay that 5/8 of an inch away. Do you see that? So that there's some space, and that helps with my evenness of coverage. It filled up that space above the circle. Now I got to try to not hit the other one. There we go. We escaped. Woo! My bobbin's getting close to empty. I can hear it really rattling in there. Fingers crossed we'll be able to finish the quilt. another thing that I wanted to mention that's kind of new in my horizon of things that I'm doing. In October, I did the first of a series of monthly workshops. So I am intending for these to roll out the second Tuesday of every month. Each one is a different topic. Each one will be delivered live initially, but replays come included. So there is a ticket price, and that will probably vary depending, I'm not sure. This is a new thing to me, but it will probably vary. But in any event, it will include access to the live workshop, and the replay will automatically be available as well. So I have not opened the enrollment yet for November's, but I can tell you what it is. It is going to be Lock It In. It's a longish title, but essentially Lock It In, Flat and Square. And it has to do with all my best tips for achieving a square finished result. So managing oddities or challenges, and it'll include some of the things I talked about today, like when I roll my quilt forward, how I cope with the batting, how I manage the batting and the quilt, how tight I pull the side tensioners, all those sorts of things. As many things as I can think of that come into play when you're working your way through a quilt. I always think that achieving a flat and square quilt is cumulative. It starts with the piecer, but it doesn't end with the piecer. Oh, there we ran out of bobbin thread, just like that. Knew it was going to happen. It's a cumulative process, so I'm going to try and show as many things as I can that the long armor can do to either keep squareness or to achieve it if it wasn't there initially. So flat and square, that is coming up second Tuesday of November. And I just decided to make them the same day like that so that it's easy for you to remember and find them. And then for students of my masterclass, you'll be getting an email this weekend. Your studio hours are going to be the first Tuesday of every month. So we're going to try and get in a rhythm like that and give that a whirl for about 6 months' time and then assess how it's going. Since I'm changing out bobbins, I'm just taking a second to put in a drop of oil. Oh yeah, something else that's on the horizon. I hope it's not silly of me to tell you stuff that's not nailed down yet, but you'll hear more about it from me. I've been talking with Vince, who is the head of sales for Bernina, the head of Q Series sales, long arm sales for Bernina, and he is going to join me for one of these live and unscripted episodes. And so we're still going to do a quilt as I would typically do, but the first part of it, he's going to be on air and we're going to talk through like some readiness type things for each quilt. So, I mean, it will be featuring, I guess, a Bernina, but these will be things like cleaning linty areas, checking threading paths, etc., that are useful for every quilter, even every domestic machine quilter. And by the way, what I'm doing now is backing up a little bit. You notice I sewed until my bobbin thread ran out, right? So I can see on the top of the fabric here, there was no tension on that bobbin thread the last few inches. So I want to take a few inches out. And I also like to make my splices be right over a seam allowance whenever I can manage it. It just makes it more secure. Even with a lock stitch, having it go through those additional layers of fabric makes it more secure. And so that's what I like to do whenever I can. But beyond that, I don't worry about having a splice in the middle of a quilt. I think that's totally fine. So I'm going to go near to that seam allowance, and then I will overlap my stitching a quarter to a half of an inch of what was there earlier, because it does not have any lock stitching now, right? I need to secure the end that was there and this new end. So I'll do a few lock stitches. Going to do a few more for good measure. And then I'll just continue with my quilting. Take a second and trim the tails. Can you see that? Bet you can't. That's because it's so good. So I'm curious, question for you guys. David McLaughlin, who was chiming in earlier, I met at the quilt show last weekend. And he brought his electronic TOA gauge to show me. And I'm curious if any of you have used the electronic version and what your thoughts are. I know I absolutely want to go and get one now and experiment with it and see how much of a difference it makes. David was explaining to me that he uses it even for his needle thread. It's got a slightly different pulley system from the manual one, and so you thread it a little bit differently to test your needle thread, but you can actually get a readout on the tension of your needle thread too. And I tell you what, if that gives useful data, wow, would that ever be a powerhouse of a tool? So I got to try that out. I'm just curious if any of you have already tried it and what your thoughts are about it. I think it was Janice who was asking about, how do you get even coverage? I need to work on spacing kind of thing. Janice, I believe you are already a student and therefore have access to our student Facebook group. But if you do, Joan Parker has quilted quite a lot of quilts using this design, and she has posted a lot of pictures in our student Facebook group. So I would go and look those Loopy pictures up and kind of look analytically at Joan's quilting of this design and see how she achieves such great coverage. She's done it masterfully. She's probably used this design in more quilts than I have at this point. I'm just seeing a little bit of fullness here, so I'm kind of using my left hand to zhuzh, to use my favorite verb. Basically to push it under the needle a little faster than it might otherwise go. It might otherwise push out in front of the needle, and I don't want it to do that because then it will end up a great big pile. I talked earlier about flatness being cumulative, and this is an example of it. If you let this push out in front of you, your problem will be cumulative too. But if you can manage it a bit at a time, you'll have much better results getting flatness and squareness and no pleats. You can see there is a fair bit of fullness right in this corner. A fair bit of fabric was eased, and that's all right. This is how you deal with it. It's a great skill to develop as a long armor because your clients or the people you quilt for will be so appreciative if you can take little wibbles and wobbles and make them look great no matter what. I really up-leveled those skills by working on vintage quilts, which were never flat and never straight, and just learning how to deal with that fullness in many different ways. That was so helpful to me. All right, guys, we have finished a whole quilt, and a good thing it is too. It was our daughter's 30th birthday this week, and she and I and her mother-in-law have a fairly long-standing tradition of high tea to celebrate her birthday. So I have to leave for that pretty shortly. So I'm glad the quilt is done. Let me get my coffee and we'll chat for a minute before we go again. If you have enjoyed this session, I would love if you would give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Live and Unscripted is my quilting reality show. Today, nothing bad happened, but sometimes it does. And I just leave that in so that you can learn from my experiences too. All right, Dave, where are we at? Jennifer, you've got me on the big camera. What's the best pattern or design? Oh, it's coming back. I know it is. Mr. Producer's catching up. To try sewing to learn manual setting, I've only used the stitch regulator. Honestly, I think Loops is a pretty good one. Again, it has no corners and no stopping points. So you can work on, moving. Okay, to try sewing to learn. I'm not clear if you're working at a long arm or at a domestic machine. But either way, if it's a long arm, smoothness of movement of the handlebars. If it's a sewing machine, smoothness and evenness of movement of the fabric. So loops are a fabulous way to practice. You can make them much tinier than what I've done today, but just that always curving can be very helpful. Nancy, do you plan on another class for Masterclass graduates, as in a more advanced one, Nancy? Probably not. That's kind of what I created my membership for, so that as I have new design ideas, instead of making the Masterclass ever larger or even creating another large one, I just release them each month. I release new things in that membership. So I won't give you a sales pitch on that. I've done a lot of that today, but there is information always in the notes below my YouTube episodes if you ever want more details about any of these things that I offer. Joan, one thing I do on purpose that I don't think Susan has mentioned on this show is that when one crosses the first circle, to close it, make it very round and not teardrop shaped. It's easy to miss. Yes. So what Joan is referring to is when you go around the circle and exit it, it's easiest to think of it this way. Go all the way around the circle, close it, and do a couple more stitches before you exit. You'll be much more likely to have a round thing as opposed to a teardrop thing because you've kind of been heading out already too early. That makes sense? Give it a try on a piece of paper and you'll see the difference. Go all the way around and track a little bit before you start exiting. Really helps with making a round circle. Gabrielle, and the binding? Well, in this case, I'm not fully sure what you're asking, but how does this quilt get bound? It's going to go back to the client. It is a client quilt, Pris, and she'll do the binding on it. Occasionally, I do that for clients, but not typically. They usually do their own. Grant, I have the digital TOA. It has interchangeable bobbin plates, so you can test M and L bobbin tension. I didn't know that either, but did you know, Grant, that you can check your needle tension on it too? I'm going to have to do some reading up on that, and I have to get me one of those. I'm sure they cost a pretty penny, but I need one. I got to try it out, right? Inquiring minds want to know. Debbie, the charity quilt I quilted last week was a bit wonky. Thanks to Susan and her YouTube videos, I knew exactly how to handle it. I used a swirl and hook design. The quilt was square and pleatless. Success. Good job, Debbie. Nancy, the masterclass is amazing. Definitely worth it. Thanks, you guys. I sure appreciate your vote of confidence. Okay. Anything else we need to mention? I'm looking at my little show notes. I was, yeah, it was a story. I posted a story yesterday on Instagram because I'm working on sewing a quilt right now, and I don't have a design wall. I have a design floor. And so it's in the walkway for Mr. Producer to get to his desk. So I took a picture yesterday of, floor and quilt and his desk totally hemmed in by my quilt and said, should I clean it up? Should I keep the quilting handy? And I think you guys voted 100%. Just keep the quilting handy. But I was nice to him. I have it sewn in strips already, so I folded the ends all in so he could walk through. That is it. Anyway, thanks everyone for joining me. We'll be doing this again. Probably the next one will be with Vince, and I will certainly let you know via email ahead of time so that you can plan for that. And try to attend live if you've got any questions for Vince. That's a great time to ask them. And he is, even if you have thoughts about features of the Bernina Q series, Vince is the guy to talk to. So you should come to that show and we'll have a good, and he's very Southern. His accent is lovely. So it will just be a fun time. So thanks for joining me, and I'll catch up with you next time. Have a great day.